Hey everybody, we're back again with another episode of Ling Talks Tech. I'm Fernando Labastida, the host, and we're here with Linh Nguyen, the CEO and co-founder of IT-Conductor. And today we're going to talk about everything related to SAP migrations. And so why don't we just get started? Tell us what's on your mind, Lynn, about this topic, which is a very extensive topic.
Yes, obviously. Well, welcome back. This is Lin again, and happy to be back. And today I got my Beetle shirt on. It's a classic. We're going to talk about why it's relevant. It's a classic topic, migrations. For many years, it's almost 25 years I've been involved with SAP migrations. Can you believe it? 25 years. And
That's a long
the
time.
players are different, and the places you migrate to is different, the landscape, the products. But the problem is still the same, right? We gotta take something from some place, put it in another place, and if you dumb it down like that, it sounds like, hey, shouldn't this problem like pretty much dumb down to very easy to solve because we're doing it for years, right? When I talked previously about things that should be improved with technology and platforms and process, migrations and the process of even assessments are still not very well adopted to technology and improvements, how we look at things. And so I think that's a interesting thing to look at. I might have to take you back like over 20 years through this journey to tell you
Take us through the journey.
why it's a relevant thing to talk about, right? So let's start with what today is. Today, customers are upgrading, migrating to cloud to try and benefit from modernization, right? Everybody says, I need to be taking advantage of AI technology. And with that, AI is going to need a lot of data. They're going to need to access faster systems. And therefore, my systems right now in some older technology stack, maybe on-prem, maybe on some other cloud, or maybe I want to go to RISE, SAP. We talked about RISE before, and it's a valid use case. SAP say, hey, you want to take advantage of SAP AI with Joule. They talk a lot about that with Sapphire last week in Orlando. If you want to take advantage of this, your system need to be on cloud and have access to faster processing, have access to more data, and then you can build your models and all the intelligence of that. So many use cases exist today. When the cloud transformation started several years ago, they were talking about agility and flexibility and cost management, utility model of pay for what you use, all that stuff. So that era has already arrived. People have done it, or lots of cloud data point out there. But a lot of that was taken care of from infrastructure standpoint, but not really improving the process, improving if you migrate your system to cloud and do nothing else, you're not really taking advantage. You may be saving some costs, or maybe some costs even go up if you're not improving your operational process, your integration, your tooling, operation management, right? So there's a lot of things to talk about there. But that's where we are today, why people think about migrations, either commercially because they're going to rise and they need to move from where they are to SAP hosted, or they're just looking to modernize, they're getting out of the old data center. But this problem existed years ago. And I remember back in the days where, in fact, I was at a customer, Colgate-Palmolive. You might know that name, right?
Yeah, I think I know about that name.
Yeah. So everybody recognized that. And they had very large SAP environment. I was actually consulting, and I came and helped them migrate large amount of systems from one environment to another to modernize. And the players always is different, but the problem is the same, right? So back then, sometimes you'd hear like, hey, somebody comes out with larger, faster. So kind of like AI world today, you have NVIDIA, and they come out with the new chip now, the Blackwell. So then, okay, everybody wants that stuff, right? So in the old days, SAP, you want faster system, bigger systems. You maybe run out of runway on your current platform. So you say, oh, I'm going to go from Sun to IBM, from HP to IBM, or IBM to Sun. So this kind of always constantly migrating and moving around, right? So every few years, or maybe a CIO will come in and say, yeah, I like this technology more, and I like that more. So eventually we had just going from one hardware vendor to another hardware vendor, and then eventually virtualization came in with VMware. And then they start moving. Oh, now we take it back. We move to like VMware because we can have our own data center virtualized. Anyway, back then we're talking very manual process to, let's say I have 30 systems. We'd go in there and we would like scan the system, do all kinds of inventory to look at its current usage to see how much capacity we need to allocate to move that, right? And then we have to estimate how long it's going to take. So imagine something like a Colgate, they have really tens of thousands of parts, toothpaste, toothbrush, whatever. So
all those different SKUs, yeah.
Everything moved through SAP, everything, inventory, sales, distribution to even like dentist office, all of that stuff moved through SAP system. So when you want to go migrate, you're going to have some downtime. You're going to need to plan how much downtime, how much testing do you need. So all of this kind of goes around the fact that it's not simple, it's complicated. You have to plan, and IT has to deliver a migration that minimally impacts the business. The business can take some level of impact, but if you miss that, there's a huge price to pay.
Yeah.
Right? Imagine if the whole company, like the size of a Fortune 100, is down for, let's say, 5 days. Okay. Nothing moves, no trucks, no shipping, no inventory. Nothing shows up at, Walmart shelves. Nothing shows up at Costco. So it's very important. Supply chain, logistics, manufacturing, everything else is, goes kind of at minimum impact. So if you look at that as the foundation of the problem and you start thinking about migration, well, what is the first thing you need to do? You need to do a proper assessment, because nobody's going to just jump in and say, we just shoot from the hip and, everybody can just jump in there and do it, right? No, you have to look at all the trains that come into the station. You got to coordinate all the track, which track goes where, the what switching, which one is more important to schedule first, which one goes in second, or which one has to go together in parallel. And if it has to be in parallel, even though one guy is huge, it takes longer time, more effort. The other guy is smaller, but it's also important, not by size, but by its role. Then you need to coordinate and orchestrate all this to make sure that you have enough resource to do both of them in parallel. So this assessment becomes like not just a matter of, I got 10 things and I got to move 10 things. No, there's careful planning in order to architect the right system, the right size, the right cost model, and then get the right resources to look at the intricacies of what to migrate, when to migrate, how to migrate, so that you minimize the downtime. So I remember in those times, I even spent a lot of time doing data analytics. I would be pulling numbers and saying, based on these numbers of how much data you have and how big your database and your system size, how many CPU, I would have to run a model and create some kind of calculator to say, this is projected to be X number of hours or days of downtime, right? Because that is the foundation of getting business to approve. If you're saying I'm like 80 hours and they're like, I have 24 hours, make it fit, right?
Yeah.
Those situations always, even to today, all these 20, 30 years, is still the foundation of the problem when it comes to a technical migration. I'm not talking about functional changes. Yes, there's always functional things when people upgrade and people need to change their business process. Those things can be worked out with business process mapping and all that. But the technical challenges of doing a migration still come down to how much can business stand? How much resource can you do? How fast can you move it? What is the minimum cost model I can go in to assume I'm going to get this done? Plan that there's always going to be kind of unknowns, right? You can't predict every possible outcome. Like, for instance, we might do a test, a mock run, we call them, and we blow out the window. We take a copy of a system and we try moving it, and it takes way too long. We estimate this much, but because there was XYZ lack of, IO in the disk or slow system, whatever, slow network. Back in the days, I remember migrating means if you are going to a different data center, sometimes the network are not what they used to be right now. The network is slow. So what happens? We actually even like copy to disk and having a disk shipped or flown on a commercial plane. We would actually have a person sent on a plane with the disk down to data center and just literally unload it there. Today, that with cloud technology, sometimes they have a better way to do it. They call it kind of a data box or something, right? And it's faster. But still, the problem is still the same. I got this much data. I got to migrate it. I got to get it over there, import it, load it up, check it out, and then have the business check it out. So the technical migration is a very kind of a half science, half art to predict, also estimate and test. Eventually, you might have to do many times, and even the times that you do it might get blown out because of one problem. While you're doing it in the middle of it, something broke. You got to restart that thing. What is that impact? With this, I say today the technology and the tools have improved. But back then, I had to write scripts, lots of scripts. Everybody can understand. Like, let's say I'm moving 50,000 tables. Your business table, your invoices, your database of many business things. Well, 50,000, and I have to chop them up, move them in parallel to try and get the time down to some. A lot of that was scripted. A lot of that was having to do it in an automated fashion back then. Later on, some of what I worked on became part of the tool. Some of the techniques became part of the tool where they automatically provide ability to size and then split it up to packages and schedule them in parallel. But the difference between now, if you took somebody out of school or college and, I learned AI in college and I just ask it how it's done, but you don't get to do it because, it's done for you. You don't understand the programming, the logic behind that and creating the scripts. What happens? You've lost that sense of how it's done, engineered behind the scene. You become a user of it, which is fine. A lot of people can do that. But what if it breaks? Everything was fine when it works. If it doesn't work, break, right? Then you need to go back to data. So without data and understanding of how it fits together or algorithms or programs to make it work, how are you going to fix the problem, right? You have to get into the code. You have to get into the script. You have to get into the data. You got to reslice it, resplit it. To understand the mechanic behind of that is important. And the reason I bring this up is that if you're still doing it today without tools, proper process, you are going to rely on people. And the people has to be the expert, the people that knows behind the scene, the nuts and the bolts. If you don't have those, because you're trying to do like some of the, we call a system integrator or managed service providers, right? That are doing these migrations and they're trying to win new business and they're trying to do all these migration projects and they're lacking the people or maybe the skill, the depth of skill. They can run 80% of projects okay like this, but the 20% that breaks and you're not using a data-driven approach to find out and help you from a more automation approach, you're going to end up with like broken migration. And that's a big deal, right? Only takes one bad migration to kind of really give you a bad reputation. In our business, we know most of the big players that do migrations, the successful ones, sometimes you hear the success stories. The horror stories you don't hear about. They'll try to like fix and do all that. But sometime after that, you might hear about the horror stories, right? The botched migration or the over budget or the missing piece of data after I migrated. And so it's very intricate. There's a few experts that have been doing it for years. There's a few tools. SAP tried to provide some of these tools. A database vendor tried to do it. Cloud providers try to do it. And everybody's tech on it is different. But what I want to really talk about is the first part. The assessment is the one where you work out all of this information, who, what, when, where, how, all that stuff. And then you would go into it with clear pieces of baseline data, what you have in terms of complexity and the costs involved. Because a lot of time, if you leave it to the CFO, they just sign the paper and say, yeah, I want to migrate. That guy's got a good name. Yeah, that big company, that's got a good name. I must be okay. No, because at the end of the day, it's still coming down to people doing the work. And if they don't have the right tools or process, you're going to end up with a very risky migration. So in migration, and later on, I built some practice for IBM in the SAP migration practice. They were looking for folks to help them win businesses for IBM platform. I remember creating lots of sales opportunities, doing migration projects. One of the things we talked about was if you know what you're doing, you don't think about the cost. You think about the risk. This is the number one reason why people don't choose to migrate easily by flipping a switch or have an easy button, because the risk is what you want to manage, right? So it's really come down to risk management. As you said, because if all your eggs are in basket, all your business go through this environment, the risk is what you want to manage. At the end of the day, it boils down to how much risk, how much will I spend money to reduce that risk. So when we talk about assessment, is to try and find out what are all the risks involved. What can I do to mitigate these risks? How can I plan for these type of disruptions? Because there will be disruptions, and how to manage that cohesively from a people process platform standpoint. So that's kind of why I think migration is an important topic, because today, again, people are asking, do I need to go to Rise? Do I need to go to cloud and benefit from modernization and AI and all that stuff? But I see a lot of the migration approach today is still paper-based. The assessment is done with spreadsheets.
I can't believe that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So, imagine you're a big system integrator. There's a large customer. They said they're interested in migrating. What typically happen is you're bidding for the assessment because you want that piece of work. So there might be, SI number one, SI number two, SI number three. They all going after RFP, and they build a team. They say, we can do assessment in 2 months. We can do whatever it is. They're saying that. And they going in there. And you know what? Imagine I'm the customer and I got 3 parties coming in, and they're all asking for the same information. Can you give me a inventory of your system? Can you give me the spreadsheet of your assets, system connection diagram? Give me a performance report you got from SAP. They call it an early watch report. So they're asking all the repetitive information.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them are taking this information, going back to some workspace, and say, I got like 100 documents. I have 10 systems. I got 100 documents. I'm going to take all these analysts, pour them in there, analyze these documents, and then come out with a strategy and a sizing and a cost and all this. And they come back and they cannot, all right. They're not doing the actual migration. They're just like coming up with some model to estimate the work. So company A, company B, company C will throw out 3 proposals. They look roughly similar, but it's not very dynamic, meaning that your data is coming from spreadsheets and documents and PDFs, but not live data, right?
Right. Not real-time data.
Why that's important is, like, let's say today I give you a data dump of my system, what it look like today, right? And let's say your proposal period is 2 months. You're spending all the time collecting data, analyzing data, writing the report, making the proposal, and so you're using this data. But like by the time you present it to management of the customer just like roll out one major feature update, and they added like 20% more users, and system is now loaded 50% more, and database just grew by 30%. So the data that you're analyzing is changing all the time. The longer you take to generate your assessment, the more the data has changed. So now you have a moving target. And this is where some of the risk comes in, is that by the time the customer decide to do a migration, it could be 6 months from the time you make a proposal. They're like, hey, vendor A, vendor B, vendor C, they bring them in, they will ask them tons of questions about the capability, go over the reports of the findings and proposals, negotiate costs. By the time they actually do it, the data that they're looking at and deciding on may be stale.
Right.
Systems have moved on. Even versions have changed. They're thinking they're moving this, but it's that, because business don't stay static very long. Now, that causes a different problem. Is like if you are, let's say, proposing a $10 million project to migrate this thing over 6 to 9 months. All of those numbers are dependent on data. But if the data is based on spreadsheets and PDFs and whatever, if I ask you, like, what is that one based on? And you go, oh, that's because, your database this size, or your system usage is this size, and that version. But then I said, well, we already changed because, 3 months ago, there was a requirement to update something, and we roll out new functionality. So now we this. I'm like, well, that's invalidate our proposal for that portion. We're going to go back and redo this, right? So this constant back and forth, typically when I've done proposal for customers based on this kind of manual approach, you always anticipate it's going to change. So what happened is the lawyers create for these companies a large like disclaimer page. Any changes, blah, 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 will require a change order. So it's not unusual that we would go in and rewrite the proposal, redo some analysis, recollect some data and write up again. So this process, it was not efficient at all. And what ends up is corners get cut. Right? They go like, hey, now we just come up with some, t-shirt sizing, rough ballpark so that we can get this thing done quickly, not waste a lot of energy. Who would want t-shirt sizing if you could do it more precisely? So what really should happen is you have precise data. You're collecting all the time, right? You do an assessment. That data, instead of providing to party A, party B, party C, giving them copies of things, and then they go away stuff, and they come and they interview you separately. You would just have an environment where the assessment data is available. And in startup world, we also know something called the M&A world, which acquisitions and investors, they want a data room. So when they ask you for data, like, oh, okay, I'm going to go and collect these documents and give to this guy. No, I'm going to have a data room already full of this information you need. And this data room will then give you a unique credential to access it, right? So think about how we do assessment should be that we collect the data is live, like a platform, like a dashboard. And when that data is live, you go and run reports you need to, you get the data there, and anything change, you can go and validate it so that everybody can independently do their work and do the assessment, get the data that they need. And analyst comes back and say, hey, we forgot to ask them this information, but I really do need to get this, metric from their system. Maybe I need to see what their CPU usage on this database that they didn't tell me about, or they didn't tell me about this system because they forgot it was in their landscape. Customers do that. They're like, I thought I told you the system, but I forgot there's this guy out here that, it does FTP of bank files. Kind of important. Out there to migrate this guy because when your bank connection break, nobody gets paid. You don't get paid either. So example like that where if you're doing a manual paper base, you're not getting the complete picture, and the picture that you do get is not completely deep and wide in the data that you collect. And so I'd say better in excess than in need. That's a term I coined. Like, you better get more data than needing more data and having to come back and ask the customer again for data. Yeah. And so if I provide you the capability to get as much data from the platform, from live, you can use that information to generate your assessment much more accurately. And this is where I think in migration, it creates less risk downstream if you get the information and stay constantly updated. So let's say I propose a migration after 4 weeks of doing assessment. The customer's going to go and negotiate contract. By the time they do it, et cetera, something's changed. Well, if that was live data, all you need to do is do a quick refresh, right? And you have, let's say, calculations of things based on a certain size. Well, if you recollect the size already exceeds certain threshold, you automatically propose something new. And you have data to point back to them and say, so with this change request that we have for a new price, because look, so I can point them to the data, right? I can say, well, the data has changed. You are X% bigger, blah, blah, blah. As opposed to just like either not knowing, which is worse, knowing but can't substantiate because you don't have that data. And you just have a feeling that, hey, 6 months, so you got to be bigger. Right? How much bigger? I don't know. You got to be bigger. So the customer then will decide that, oh, it's great, but I'm not ready to do it for another year. What happens? Let's say I spend, I don't know, 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever it is to do this assessment. And then the customer says, I'm not ready because, I just wanted some budgeting figure. Looks like, we don't have the budget to do this now. We're going to push it out 9 months, 12 months. The problem now occurs that whole proposal now goes into stale data land. Okay. Because 6-9 months from now, they come back. What are you going to do? To do due diligence, you got to do everything again. Right? If the customer is like a year, I would hope if this customer is growing, they need to go to cloud. They are growing, they're adding more stuff, they're changing all the time. You're going to have to go back and do a substantial amount of rework on some of the things you do. My take on it is that it's much more efficient to have a connected data stream to provide you this live data room, if you will, of information that's refreshed, let's say once a day. You don't even need live, like if the system automatically generates this data on a daily basis, you have a baseline that any company can use for analytics to analyze, to use as a basis for the proposal. So, you're not going to get a guy to come and give you a proposal to do a remodeling on your house, and then he comes back 6 months and you have a new room. You can't use the old proposal, right? It has to be live, updated, and very easy to access. And also from a legal standpoint, when you put in a migration proposal, there are stipulations like you are this and that and that. This is based on information we find. It's much easier to do that when you can substantiate the data. It came from this time, and I can show you what it looks like, and I can show what it looks now.
Exactly.
Or what I would say the other way, there's a performance guarantee all the time about doing work. If I do work, it should be better, faster, whatever I can prove that, I've made your environment better, right? Well, if you don't have access to the all system performance baseline, how are you going to say, you know what, I was on here and my business process ran that way, and then I went on there and it ran that way, but it took twice as long. If that's what the customer statement after go live is, after migration, how are you going to defend yourself if you don't have the piece of data and go back? You know what? Let me point out to you this baseline that you had. No, they didn't run twice as fast. It was about the same. This happens all the time after go live, or even leading up to making a decision to go live, is that there are pieces of thing where customer tests and say, hey, this is not what I asked for. It's worse. Well, you have to have data to go back to the point and say, well, actually, no, it was actually about the same, right? We have cases where customers have gone live and plenty of things they had eternal SWAT team on like 24/7 for, we call it hypercare. Well,
Right.
hypercare is supposed to last for maybe a day or 2, 3 days, maybe. Some hypercare went on for like 2 weeks because the problems they didn't find, or the problems they found now, were not something they could identify easily because they didn't have data to back it up. They used paper-based stuff that was very static. They can't go back and say, you know what, we found pieces of your program running, and this is the capture of it, and we know this is a problem that existed, and we can address this issue with some remedies that we know. So all of this could be prevented pretty much if you had the ability to do a smarter assessment. So I think my whole time spent doing migrations from many companies and building migration practices,
Yeah.
probably over 1,000 systems for different customers.
Wow.
And even today, I'm helping customers with like going to Rise or going to cloud or whatever. The number one thing I say is like, always have access to data. You don't know in a 6-month project who's going to come and ask for a piece of data. They're always going to come and ask, because until you're fully live on it, you still need to refer back to the existing environment.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Most customers don't have that. Now let me go get it. Instead of just point them to a dashboard or a URL and here's your information. That's extremely important. And today, a lot of the manual work involves screenshotting stuff. Can you imagine?
My goodness.
I need to check. I'm going to go in and I'm going to screenshot all these snapshots. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can do that. But as soon as you screenshot that, that's old.
It's redundant. It's like it loses value as soon as it leaves the lot, right? The car loses
Yeah,
value
yeah.
as it leaves the lot.
So I think there's a much better way to do it, and that's kind of why I'm a kind of a champion this concept where assessments are done. You don't even have to send people on site; can be done remotely. Has a lot of data collections, produces reports baseline, and then stays connected in that environment when the customer decides to do it or not do it. They still have fresh data that can be left there, can just be reconnected, generate new reports, provide you that kind of baseline, and it will cut down a lot of the effort. So we spend a lot of time trying to preach this approach because it makes a big difference. Because I'm not talking it as an external person, I'm talking as somebody who does migration. Sometimes I do migration for a living, right? I would say, well, if my job depended on it, what would I do differently? How would I improve this process? And so a lot of the time we would look at like, what can we do better? How can we streamline this so that data is just like clean, constant, dated, and is accessible by whoever needs that, right? And again, 3 years from now, you might turn around and do another migration because there'll be the next wave of technology refresh. So don't think like I'm going to do this migration, I'm going to just go retire. And, no, migrations are a constant part of what we call change, right? Technology change, systems change, customers will continue to migrate. And so as long as there are choices for them, they will continue to do that. So this constant need needs to be solved by a solution that is more than just people or even process. It has to take in data through a platform to provide this consistency of service. System integrators need this, managed service providers need it, even SAP themselves need it, because remember, SAP doesn't do the migration. They rely on partners.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
They're not gonna, they say, hey, I've got the cloud, you guys hand me the data, then I'll manage for you. Right. So many projects I've worked with, like even like SAP Rise, is like the partner, the customer has to do a lot of the work to bring the data to SAP, then they will manage it, right? But if you can't do the project properly, the SIs, the MSP need to up their game to provide proper assessment so that they know exactly what needs to be done, the skill that needs to do it, the level of automation that needs to do it to meet the timeline. Because you can scope out as much as you want, but if you're lacking the ability to automate some of this, you're going to end up looking for skill resources last minute. And even you have good skill resources, they don't do things exactly the same way unless you have a very crisp, clean run book or level automation. Like building a system should be automated. Installing software should be automated. Migrating data should be somewhat almost automated because a lot of the data movement is very intensive. It could be, there was example, I had to like watch this migration for over 48 hours because it was very critical. If you got an FAA or airport traffic controller, they don't go to sleep, man. Planes fly all the time, right? They can't say freeze, right? So that this level requires orchestration. So when I compare to like a airport traffic controller tower, it's like that. You need orchestration. You need some level automation, intelligent alerting, and all of these things that needs to be built in to make a successful effort.
Yeah. So the orchestration concept is something that I know that you've been talking about for a while. It's kind of it's a topic that you're passionate about. It's kind of the reason why you called your company IT-Conductor. Because a conductor conducts an orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit more about orchestration as a concept for managing IT and migration and data and
Yeah.
cloud, etc.
Yeah, a lot of the time, if you think about today, some kind of management, or you think about project managers, they orchestrate stuff, right? They are human that manages project. And what is a project? A bunch of tasks, deliverables, timelines, resources that they need to manage and coordinate to make sure that everything happens on time according to the right dependency to deliver a project. So think about a project manager. So that's an analogy. So if IT-Conductor says can automate a bunch of things to make sure that this happened, this happened, this happened to deliver you a finished project of some sort. So example would be, let's say a migration. If I have this weekend 3 systems to migrate, I have 2 guys. Can 2 guys work 3 migration? They can. Can they get burned out? Yes, they will. Can they miss something because they're just jumping between things? They probably would. Would you want your 2 guys to have an orchestrated framework where they are the glorified project manager and they're just pushing buttons, moving as little as possible the manual work to more orchestration work? So migrations are always about, what happens on the source, bring it to the target, maybe through an intermediate system in between. There's lots of moving parts. Whatever you could do to automate a lot of that through tooling, and then tying the tooling into instrumentation and processes to make it a well orchestrated project, right? So we know project set of tasks. So let's say I had a task built into a run book, line by line, what to do. Let's say 50% of these lines could be automated. Like they run a script, they run a process, they run something. That's 50% of the workload of the migration engineer, for instance, right? So you could have 2 engineers doing 3 or 4 migrations in parallel because they're really becoming the orchestrator. The controller with the air traffic controller example would be, you're not flying the planes, but you're telling where the plane's going. And you have some tools to tell you yeah, this stuff, you kind of point it in the direction, you coordinate this first and then that and then this. In a similar way, a automation orchestration platform does it is I can create runbooks, I can create schedules, I can create tasks that are dependent and say, this task has to finish first, like maybe export my data and then copy that data to some interim, we call it a migration box, for instance. And then from that box, because now the data center is somewhere else on the cloud, I need to be able to copy that over there and import that data. So there may be, let's say, 3-4 phases that has to happen in some sequence. IT-Conductor can create, let's say, a workflow, for instance, that will orchestrate these either big package of tasks with a bunch of subtasks, or if it's just a simple activity like a script or a tool that we can invoke and run, we can do that. But you will have visibility in this process through a workflow. You can monitor it when there's something wrong, somebody get notified. Like a lot of the time I did migrations, like I couldn't sleep because, every time you step away, it would die. Put your head down for an hour nap, it would die, so you wasted an hour. You could have a process where it's watching it. It would just notify you. You could take a nap. It would just ring your phone or something. And okay, I'll address that now. As opposed to like wake up every 15 minutes in a sweat and trying to figure out, or you can automatically anticipate that certain things likely to die. This is interestingly, when you're moving data in a migration, sometimes you actually expect errors. It's kind of weird to say, I expect errors. Like, well, if you expect error, why can't you just like avoid them? No, because I'm trying to move fast and break things, like in a startup world. So for instance, if I'm trying to move a lot of data, I'm going to jam everything down the 10-lane freeway, right? I'm not going to go one car at a time. I'm going to send my entire fleet, right? Yes, there'll be chaos and everybody's racing to get there fastest. Maybe there's a collision. Maybe there's some, I'll deal with that one as an exception, but I will get my data over there as fast as I can. And in the process, if something breaks, I can automatically anticipate this error. I can recover from it by restarting it or, have manual intervention, somebody notified automatically there's a problem, something like that. So this example of why orchestration becomes important, right? Just because everybody's coordinated doesn't mean you don't need a traffic cop, right? Doesn't mean you don't need lights on the street. Think about it. If you have automated, now we have self-driving car, right? Full self-driving. In the Silicon Valley here, Waymo, I see them all the time, and I go running in the morning.
Here in Austin, Waymo's all over the place in Austin.
Yeah, so they're like on average 3 or 4 Waymos. This morning I ran, there was at least 3 or 4 that was just on the street going around. Now, you think about it, ideally, if it was self-driving, you wouldn't need traffic lights. They all just avoid collision. They just like automatically, but no, you still need orchestration. You need coordination because, things work better that way, right? So in a certain way, people say, well, I have a tool for that. I have a tool. I can do this. I got people who know what they're doing. I'll just let them do it. No, you still need orchestration. You want to schedule things so that you have it on the plan. When I start here, I finish here. In between, I have all these activities in a workflow, and I have a well orchestrated project, right?
Yeah.
Think about this in terms of project coordination. Translate that into a live platform, a workflow automation to allow you to like take your hands off and not be on the steering wheel all the time. So that's really, when we talk about migration, the success rate increased tremendously. The time goes down when you can repeat something over and over again using data-driven approach, using automation orchestration approach.
Yeah. That's amazing. I love this approach, and we're going to be continuing to talk about this topic, including, and we're going to be announcing this pretty soon, but including a series of webinars that we're going to be having specifically focused on MSPs and migration assessments and orchestration. So I think this is a topic that really needs definitely more focus. So any last parting words, Lynn, before we say goodbye this time?
Well, like I said, back to my age-old thing. With data, better in excess than in need. I need that data, right? But have it in excess, have available all the data that you can ever want, and use that data wisely. If you're in need of data and the data is not there, then you have a missing hole and gap in your process. So I would say use data-driven approach for improving your process and automation. In the long run, it drives the efficiency and accuracy of the work.
Perfect. Well, Lynn, thank you so much. And we will See you all next time in another episode of Lynn Talks Tech. Thank you so much, Lynn.
All right. Cheers. Thank you.